Descript. I tried everything in life. At 63, I still have nothing. I want to start with a feeling that I have never been able to fully describe to anyone, not because the words do not exist, but because saying them out loud has always felt like too much of an admission, like crossing a line from which there is no return. The feeling is this: emptiness. Not the emptiness of a bad day or a hard week or a rough season. A deeper emptiness than that. The emptiness of a person who has been trying for a very long time, genuinely trying with everything they had, in every direction available to them, and who sits down one day and looks at the results of all that trying and finds almost nothing there. No house, no savings, no retirement, no career that produced anything lasting, no financial security of any kind, just the memory of the effort and the silence where the results were supposed to be. That is the feeling I want to talk about today. I am 63 years old, and that feeling has been my companion for longer than I want to admit. And today, I'm finally giving it a name and saying it out loud and trusting that somewhere out there, someone needs to hear it as much as I need to say it. I have tried everything. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say that, because I think the phrase can sound like an exaggeration, and it is not. I'm not saying I tried every possible thing that has ever existed in the universe of human possibility. I am saying that I tried everything I could see from where I was standing, everything that was visible to me, accessible to me, within the range of what a person with my background and my resources and my particular position in the economic order of things could realistically attempt. I tried hard work, I tried different jobs, I tried different industries. I tried relocating when the work ran out where I was. I tried saving when there was anything left to save, which was rare but occasionally true. I tried staying optimistic when optimism was all I had, which was often. I tried every version of the story where things were about to get better, where the next job would be different, where the next year would produce what the previous year had not. I tried all of it, and at 63, sitting here now, the trying has produced something that I can only describe as close to nothing, and living with that, living inside the knowledge of that, is what I'm going to talk about today. I grew up in a house where nobody talked about money in any forward-looking way. Money was not a subject of planning or strategy or education in my family. It was a subject of immediate concern. It was talked about in terms of what was owed and what was due and what had to be covered by Friday. The relationship my family had with money was entirely reactive, entirely present tense, entirely organized around the urgent rather than the important. I did not know growing up that there was another way to relate to money. I did not know that some families had conversations about the future, about investing, about building, about the difference between money that works for you and money that you simply work for. Those conversations did not happen in my house. What happened in my house was survival, organized and relatively functional survival, but survival. And I absorbed that as the template, as the way money worked, as the relationship with finances that was simply how things were done. By the time I understood that there were other templates available, other ways of relating to money that produced different outcomes, I was already in my 40s, and the habits of a lifetime were deeply set, and the options that had been theoretically available to me in my 20s and 30s had mostly closed. Not all of them, but enough of them that the path forward looked substantially different from what it would have looked like if I had known earlier what I know now. And that is not a complaint exactly. It is a description. The gap between what I knew and what I needed to know, and the timing of when I understood that gap, is one of the central facts of my financial life. I cannot change it, but I can name it honestly as part of the story. I started working young, the way kids start working young when the family needs it, and the option of waiting for the right opportunity does not exist. I was 15 when I had my first real job. A summer job, manual labor, the kind of work that teaches you quickly what your body is worth on the open market, which is not much when you are 15 and have no skills and no credentials and no connections. I was not resentful of that then. I did not have the vocabulary for resentment at 15. What I had was the simple satisfaction of earning, of contributing, of being part of the mechanism that kept things going. That satisfaction was real, and I do not want to diminish it by looking at it only through the lens of what it produced, which was very little. The satisfaction was real. The work was real. The effort was genuine. What was not sufficient was the return. The years that followed were years of movement, constant movement, not because I was restless or irresponsible, but because the jobs that were available to someone with my profile, which is to say jobs that paid modestly and offered limited security and had no guaranteed longevity, did not stay available indefinitely. They ended. Businesses closed, seasons changed, contracts expired, positions were eliminated, and when they ended, I found the next one, and then the next one after that. I developed over decades a practical expertise in finding work, not great work, not work that produced security or advancement or the kind of institutional knowledge that becomes a career, but work, the next job, the next assignment, the next thing that would cover the next month. I became very good at the immediate solution and very poor at the long-term build, not by design, by necessity. The immediate solution was always more urgent than the long-term build, and urgency always won. I want to tell you about the moment, the specific moment that I keep returning to when I try to understand, honestly and without the protective blur of not looking directly, what my life has become. It was a Friday evening about 2 years ago. I had worked that week, a full week, physically demanding work that left me tired in the way that tired feels different at 61 than it felt at 31. The kind of tired that lives in your joints rather than just your muscles. I had gotten my paycheck, deposited it, and sat down with the bills that had accumulated over the previous 2 weeks to figure out what got paid and what had to wait. This is a ritual I have performed hundreds of times, maybe thousands, across my adult life. The bill-sorting ritual, the prioritization of what cannot be deferred against what might survive another week or two. I am practiced at it. I could probably do it in my sleep. But that Friday evening, something was different. Not in the numbers, which were what they always were, which is to say, not enough. Producing the same familiar calculation of what covers and what doesn't. What was different was me. Something in me that had been absorbing this ritual for decades, without fully registering its meaning, finally registered it. Fully, without the protective numbness that long familiarity had built around it. I sat at that table, and I looked at those bills, and I looked at the paycheck, and I did the math, and I looked at what would be left when the non-negotiable things were paid, and the number that remained was $47. $47. After a full week of physical work at 61 years old, after all the bills that could not wait were handled, I had $47. And the thought that came unbidden and completely clear was not a thought about the specific month or the specific numbers, or what could be done differently in the short term. The thought was, this is not a month. This is my life. This is not a temporary situation that is going to resolve into something better. This is the situation. This is what 61 years of trying has produced. $47 on a Friday evening, and a body that is tired and a future that looks exactly like the present, only older. I did not cry. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a version of this moment that gets described with more drama than it actually had. It was not dramatic, it was quiet. It was the quietest and most terrible kind of recognition, the kind that does not announce itself loudly, but that settles into you like something permanent, like a truth that has been waiting a long time to be fully received, and has finally, on a Friday evening, with $47 on the table, found its moment. I sat with it for a while. I paid the bills. I went to bed, and I've been living with that recognition ever since, trying to figure out what to do with a truth that I can no longer avoid. Let me talk about the body, because the body is a part of this story that does not get talked about enough when we discuss financial struggle in older working-class people. My body is 63 years old, and it has worked hard for most of those 63 years, and it shows. Not catastrophically, not in a way that has prevented me from functioning, but visibly, feelably, in the specific ways that a body accumulates the record of its use. The back that does not straighten fully in the morning anymore, the knees that have opinions about stairs that they did not used to have, the hands that carry the texture of decades of physical work in a way that is permanent now, that no amount of rest will undo. These are not complaints. They are facts. They are the physical record of the working life I have lived. But they are also increasingly a constraint. Because the work that has been available to me, the work that paid the $47 Fridays, is work that requires a body that is not showing the where mine is showing. And the question of how much longer I can do that work, the question that I could always defer when I was 50 or 55, is a question that has become urgent in a way it was not before. When I think about retirement, which I try not to do too often because thinking about it produces a specific kind of anxiety that is not useful if I cannot also produce a solution, I think about it in terms of the body, not in terms of a date or an age or a financial milestone. In terms of the body, in terms of the point at which the body will no longer be able to do what I need it to do, to earn what I need to earn to survive. That point is coming. I cannot see exactly when it is coming, but I can feel it getting closer in the way you feel weather changing, in the accumulated evidence of smaller and more frequent signals. And what I do not have, what I have never managed to build, is anything on the other side of that point, anything that would be there when the body stops being able to do what it has been doing. That gap between the approaching limit of my physical working life and the absence of anything built to sustain me beyond it is the most frightening thing I live with. More frightening than the debt, more frightening than the rent, more frightening than any single bill, because it is not a problem of the present, it is the problem of the future, and it is a problem I do not know how to solve. I want to talk about the word emptiness, because I used it at the beginning and I think it deserves more precision than I gave it there. The emptiness I feel when I sit with the full reality of my life is not depression exactly, though it has things in common with depression. It is not despair exactly, though it has things in common with despair. It is something more specific than either of those. It is the feeling of a person who put things into a container for a very long time, effort and time and physical labor and years of showing up, and who expected the container to hold something, and who opens it finally and finds it mostly empty, not completely empty. There are things in the container. There are relationships, there are memories, there are the intangible accumulations of a life fully lived in contact with other human beings. But the things that the culture told me would be in the container, the financial things, the security things, the this is what working hard produces things, those are mostly not there. And the feeling of reaching into the container and not finding them is the emptiness I am describing. That emptiness has a particular quality in relation to time. Because at 30, the emptiness of not having built anything yet is not really emptiness at all. It is just the beginning. The container is supposed to be empty at 30. You are supposed to be filling it. The emptiness at 30 is the emptiness of potential, which feels nothing like the emptiness of 63. At 63, the container is supposed to be full, or at least fuller than this. At 63, you are supposed to be able to look at what you accumulated and feel, if not complete satisfaction, at least the reasonable pride of someone who built something real over the course of a working life. I do not feel that, and the absence of that feeling at this age is qualitatively different from any financial difficulty I experienced at 30 or 40 or 50. It is heavier. It has a finality to it that earlier difficulties did not have. It is the difference between a setback and a verdict. I want to be honest about the role of hope in all of this, because hope is complicated at 63 in a way that it is not at younger ages, and I think that complication deserves to be named. When I was in my 30s and 40s, hope was easy. Not always justified, not always connected to realistic assessment of the situation, but easy. The future was long, and the possibilities were genuinely open, and even in the hard times, there was the reasonable sense that things could change, that the circumstances were not permanent, that the next year or the next job or the next break could produce something different. Hope did not require much from me then. It was almost automatic, the natural buoyancy of a person who has time on their side. At 63, hope requires work. It does not come automatically anymore. It has to be chosen deliberately against the evidence of 6 decades that sometimes seems to be pointing in a different direction. And choosing hope deliberately when the evidence is complicated is a very different act from feeling it naturally. It is an act of will rather than an act of emotion, and I am not always capable of it. There are days when the will is not there, when the weight of everything is heavier than the will to hope. When the $47 Friday feeling returns without invitation and sits on everything I try to do or think or feel. On those days I do not have hope. I just have the next hour and then the hour after that and the accumulation of hours that becomes a day and then a week and then another month survived. But there are other days when something shifts and the will to hope is present, and I can access genuinely and not just performatively the sense that the story is not over and that the not over matters. Those days are less frequent than they used to be and more hard-won than they used to be, but they exist. And on those days I try to do something with the hope rather than just feel it. I try to translate it into a concrete action, however small, that represents a different relationship with my situation than the passive endurance that the heavier days require. Because hope that does not produce action is just a feeling, and feelings, however important, do not change the $47 Friday. I want to say something about what I have learned across 63 years and all of this trying that I did not know when I started. Not lessons in the motivational poster sense. Real things, hard-earned specific things that cost me years to understand, and that I wish I had understood earlier, and that I am passing along now in the hope that someone younger than me might encounter them at a point where they can still change something. The first thing is that financial education is not a luxury. It is not something that exists for people with money or people with certain kinds of careers or people who went to certain kinds of schools. It is a survival skill that every working person needs and that most working people never receive, not because they are incapable of it, but because the system that could provide it does not prioritize providing it to the people who need it most. I did not know how debt compounds. I did not know what the time value of money meant in practical terms. I did not know that the difference between saving $20 a week at 25 and saving $20 a week at 45 is not just 20 years of savings. It is the exponential difference that compounding makes over those 20 years. I did not know these things because nobody taught them to me, and I did not know to go looking for them. And not knowing them cost me in ways that I am still paying for at 63. The second thing is that shame is the enemy of change, not a contributor to change, not something that motivates you to do better. The enemy of change, because shame drives you underground, and underground is where nothing gets examined and nothing gets addressed and nothing gets better. I spent decades being too ashamed of my financial situation to look at it directly, too ashamed to ask for help, too ashamed to have the conversations that might have produced different outcomes. The shame kept me in exactly the situation I was ashamed of, which is the cruelest trick shame plays. It promises you that hiding will protect you, and instead it just leaves you alone with the thing you are hiding from, without the information or the support or the perspective that being honest might have brought. The third thing is that the present moment, however difficult, is always more workable than the avoided future. I spent a lot of years deferring, telling myself that when things were better I would address the debt. When things were easier I would start saving. When the right moment came, I would make the changes that needed to be made. The right moment has a habit of not coming when you are waiting for it. What comes is the present moment, which is imperfect and complicated and not the moment you were waiting for, but which is the only moment in which anything can actually be done. I am doing things now that I should have done 20 years ago, and they are producing results that are smaller than they would have been 20 years ago, but they are real results, happening in real time, in the only moment that is ever actually available, which is this one. Let me tell you what doing things now looks like at 63 concretely, because I think the gap between advice and reality is large, and I want to close it as much as I can. I am not following a financial plan designed by a professional. I cannot afford a financial professional. I am not executing a sophisticated strategy that involves diversified investments and tax optimization and all the vocabulary of financial planning that assumes a certain level of resources to begin with. I do not have those resources. What I have is an honest look at my situation every single week, a budget that is real rather than aspirational, a commitment to putting aside whatever is available after the genuine necessities are covered, however small that amount is, and a willingness to have conversations I avoided for decades. The amount I am putting aside is not impressive. I am not going to tell you the number because the number is not the point. The point is the habit. The point is the consistent, deliberate, non-negotiable redirection of whatever is available towards something that is not immediately consumed. The point is, the weekly honest look that replaced the monthly avoidance, that replaced the yearly deliberate not thinking about it. Those replacements are real changes. They are not producing dramatic financial transformation, but they are producing the first consistent movement in a positive direction that my financial life has had in a very long time. And movement, at 63 in any positive direction, is not nothing. I also want to talk about the conversations I am starting to have that I never had before, because I think they are as important as the practical financial changes, and maybe more so. I am talking to people in my life about my real situation, not performing the managed version, not giving the carefully edited summary that makes things sound more stable than they are. The real version, the numbers, the fear, the Friday evening with $47, the body that is getting tired, the retirement that does not exist. I'm saying these things to people who can handle the truth and who have things to offer in response, not necessarily money, but perspective and information, and the simple and profound relief of not carrying the full weight of it alone. Those conversations have produced things I did not expect. They have produced practical information I did not have, small things but real things, about resources and programs and options that exist for people in situations like mine that I simply did not know existed because I was too ashamed to be in a position where I needed to know about them. They have produced the specific relief I mentioned, the setting down of something I had been carrying alone. And they have produced, in a few cases, the experience of being fully known by another person without being diminished for it, which is the thing the shame most consistently lies about. The shame says, if they knew, they would think less of you. The shame is wrong. I told the truth and was met with something much closer to respect than pity. The respect of one human being for another who is dealing honestly with a hard situation rather than hiding from it. I want to say something about the word regret, because at 63 regret is a presence in my life that I have had to develop a relationship with. It is there. It is real. It has content, specific moments and choices and paths not taken that I can identify and that I think about, with the particular quality of attention that regret requires. I do not want to pretend the regret is not there, because it is there, and pretending otherwise would be dishonest, and dishonesty is what I am trying to move away from. But I have also had to learn what to do with regret, so that it does not simply become a way of punishing myself for a past that cannot be changed. What I have come to is this: regret is useful when it informs the present, when it helps you understand what you are doing now in light of what you did then, when it gives you information about patterns and tendencies and default behaviors that produced outcomes you did not want, when it functions as data rather than verdict. Regret as data is useful. Regret as verdict is paralyzing. And I have spent too long living with regret as verdict, sitting inside the judgment of all the things I did wrong and all the things I did not do right, as if the judgment itself were accomplishing something. It was not accomplishing anything. It was just suffering, and I have had enough suffering to last the rest of my life. What I am choosing now, to the extent that choosing is possible, is to use the regret for the information it contains and to refuse, as consistently as I can manage, to let it be the last word on who I am and what is still possible. What is still possible? That is the question I want to end with, because I think it is the only question that has any productive answer available to it. Not what should I have done, not what did I do wrong, not what would my life look like if I had started earlier, or known better, or had different circumstances. What is still possible, starting from exactly here, with exactly what I have, in exactly the time that remains. And the honest answer, the answer I have arrived at through the process of looking clearly rather than looking away, is more than the emptiness suggests. Not everything, not the life I imagined at 25 or would have built if things had gone differently. That life is not available anymore, and pretending otherwise would be its own kind of dishonesty. But more than nothing, more than the $47 Friday suggests, more than the tired body and the absent savings and the retirement that does not exist yet would indicate if those were the only data points. Because those are not the only data points. There is also the fact that I am still here, still thinking clearly, still capable of work and of change and of honest engagement with my own situation. There is the fact that the weekly honest look is producing information that the monthly avoidance never produced. There is the fact that the conversations I am having are producing connections and resources and possibilities that the silence never produced. There is the fact that every week I put aside whatever is available, however small, is a week in which the direction changed. There is the fact that I am 63 and not 83, and that the difference between those two numbers, in terms of what is still possible, is real and meaningful even if it is less than the difference between 63 and 33. I am not going to build the retirement I should have built. That is honest, and I am saying it clearly rather than softening it. I am not going to own a home before the working years end, not unless something changes dramatically and unexpectedly. I am not going to close the gap between where I am and where I should be in any complete way. Those things are past the horizon of what is realistically available to me, given the time and resources I have. I am not pretending otherwise. What I am going to do is make the next 10 years different from the last 10 years. Not in a dramatic, transformation narrative way. In the real, slow, consistent, imperfect way that actual change happens in actual human lives. I'm going to look at my money honestly every week for the rest of my working life. I'm going to put aside whatever is available every single time without waiting for the amount to feel significant enough to matter. I'm going to have the conversations I used to avoid. I'm going to ask for help when help is available, and I'm going to not be ashamed of needing it. I'm going to take care of this body, which is the only instrument I have for continuing to earn in the ways that are available to me without spending money I do not have. I'm going to treat the remaining years with the intention and the honesty that the previous years did not always receive. And I am going to try to make peace with the emptiness, not by filling it with false comfort or comfortable lies about how everything worked out fine, but by sitting with it honestly and understanding that the emptiness, real as it is not the complete picture. The container is not as full as it should be, but it is not empty. There are things in it that money cannot produce and that the financial accounting does not capture. There are people who have known me and stayed. There are moments of genuine connection and genuine contribution and genuine presence in the lives of people I care about. There are 63 years of showing up, imperfectly and incompletely, but genuinely, to the life that was available to me. None of that is nothing. All of it is real, and the honest accounting of a life includes all of it, not just the balance sheet. I am 63 years old. I tried everything I could see. So I still have very little in the financial sense that this culture uses to measure what a life has produced. That is the truth. The complete truth is more complicated and more human and less reducible to a verdict than the shame wants it to be. And I am going to keep living inside the complete truth as honestly as I can manage for whatever time remains. Not because it is easy, because it is the only thing I have ever tried that feels like it might actually be true. That is enough. That has to be enough. And today, for the first time in a long time, I almost believe that it is. If you are 60 or 55 or 45, and you recognize something in what I said, if the emptiness landed, if you have had your own version of the $47 Friday and never told anyone about it, I want you to know. The shame is lying to you about what that moment means. It does not mean what the shame says it means. It means you are a person who tried, in real circumstances with real constraints, and who arrived somewhere difficult, and who is still here and still capable of choosing something different. That is not failure. That is the beginning of honesty. And honesty, at any age, in any situation, is always where everything that is still possible begins.